Hello and welcome to Lovely English Stories. This story is written for intermediate English learners. Ready? Let's get started. B2 English Story: A Stormy Night. There was an unsettling feeling in the air. The clouds had turned from a wispy white to a dense grey. The wind had picked up, and the birds were no longer singing in the trees. The sense of unease was growing. Matt opened his back door and stood for a few moments. He breathed in the air and tried to pinpoint why the atmosphere felt so strange. He concluded that a storm was brewing. It had been a while since they'd had a proper storm. The earth was dry and the air was humid. Matt's pet dog, Mable, was starting to become agitated. She always did this when the weather was about to change. Matt lived alone in rural England. He owned a small cottage overlooking a valley. He had beautiful views and enjoyed the peace and quiet. The only problem was that in the winter, when it snowed or rained a lot, he sometimes got stranded. So he bought himself a large freezer to store lots of food. He always batch cooked and baked, so whenever the weather was bad, he knew he would be okay for food for a while. Matt was glad that he had recently stocked up on fruit, vegetables, and meat. He would be able to make himself a variety of meals to last him at least a week. He had also bought lots of treats and food for Mable too. As he looked down over the valley, he saw that the houses slowly became hazy. The rain was coming. He rushed out into his garden and brought in all the washing he had on the washing line. He then covered his garden chairs and table and took down anything that could get blown away. He was especially worried about some of his new plants. He wasn't sure they would survive a powerful thunderstorm. Finally, Matt put his car in his garage. Last time there was a storm, there were huge hailstones. He didn't want them to dint his lovely car. When Matt went back inside his cottage, he closed all the windows and made himself a big cup of tea. He got a packet of his favorite biscuits out, and then he lit the fire. The room was toasty and warm. He then lit a few candles and sat on his sofa in his bay window, which overlooked the valley and the village below. He loved to watch the storms from the comfort of his home. He just hoped that Mable would be okay and not too scared of the thunder. She came over and snuggled up to him on the sofa. Half an hour went by, and the wind picked up, and the sky got moodier. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there was a flash of light across the sky, and a few seconds later, a crash of thunder. Mable was startled and hid under the sofa. Matt tried to reassure her, but she didn't like loud noises, especially unexpected loud noises. Suddenly, the storm was in full swing. Lightning lit up the valley, and thunder rumbled across the skies. Matt saw some fork lightning hit the houses below. He was a little worried that his house might get struck. He could hear the garden furniture moving around in the wind, and the bird feeders were banging together on the tree branches. It was wild and noisy. Matt found it quite exciting, although he was a little worried that someone might get caught in it and end up being a wet mess. The storm rumbled on and became noisier and fiercer. Mabel was whimpering under the sofa, and no amount of treats or cuddles was reassuring her. Matt could hear a car revving on the little lane that ran alongside his home. He saw the car headlights come up the hill and past his little cottage. Then, all of a sudden, he heard the car make a very unhealthy noise. Oh dear, he thought, that car has broken down. Matt decided to find his waterproof coat, and even though it was hailstoning and throwing it down with rain outside, he ran out to the car to check that the driver was okay. He got to the little car and knocked on the window. The driver looked startled. "Everything okay in there?" Matt said. The driver slowly opened the window. It was an elderly lady. She looked worried. "I'm ever so sorry to bother you, but it appears that my car has decided to conk out at the most inconvenient time." Matt invited the lady, who was called Ivy, into his cottage until the storm cleared. He moved her car to the side of the road, put the hazard lights on, and called the roadside assistance. Once inside, Ivy shook off the rain from her coat and sat down with a sigh. Apparently, she only lived up the road from Matt, but they had never met. He made her a lovely cup of tea and offered her some of his homemade cake. They sat in Matt's bay window and watched the storm rage across the valley. Mabel was still upset under the sofa, but somehow Ivy's presence made her calmer. After a while, she laid at Ivy's feet and let her stroke her. Ivy told Matt about all the storms she'd witnessed over the years. She was glad to live on the hill overlooking the valley now. She once lived in the valley, and her house would often flood when the storms came. Ivy told Matt more stories about friends of hers who had been struck by lightning while they played out in the rain. She told him about her old cottage in the valley and about how good the rain would be for their gardens. After an hour or so, the storm finally calmed, the thunder quietened, and the lightning stopped. Suddenly, the dark skies were awash with a beautiful red and orange sunset. Matt and Ivy went outside to admire the view. "How stunning," said Ivy. "This view never ceases to amaze me, even after all these years." At that moment, Ivy's roadside assistance appeared and towed her car to her house. She gave Matt a big hug and thanked him for being so kind. Mabel was fussing around her and didn't want her to leave, so she promised to visit again in a few days. But next time, she would bring her homemade cake. Let's hope there's no storm next time I visit, shouted Ivy as she walked up the road to her house. Matt chuckled as he waved goodbye to her. Then he uncovered his garden furniture, left some food out for the birds, and cleared away the broken tree branches. He thought how it's not every day that a thunderstorm results in a new friendship. He was extremely glad for this storm because now he had a new friend in Ivy. We hope you enjoyed this lovely English story. Thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.